Want me to call it to order?
Please.
The Sexual Offense Treatment Board meeting is convening at 9:09 a.m. on November 18th, 2022 at the Health Licensing Office in Salem, Oregon by telephone conference call. I will now call roll. Malcolm McDonald here. Joe Ferguson.
Here.
Kelly Crane.
Here.
Jeremy Howe.
Here.
Bill Davis.
Here.
Is Kari Hempel officially a board member?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I see you're here. You just weren't on the script that I had, so I'm just making sure.
Yeah, whenever we do a roll call, Malcolm, let's be sure to include Kari in the roll call.
Okay. I have her on my handwritten list here, so.
Excellent, thank you. Okay.
Okay, well, I can finish up this piece here too. The members, when you wish to speak, please state your last name for the record. Board members are asked not to use the chat feature during meetings. Public members wishing to speak must first sign in on the roster sheet available. For public members calling in on the public phone line, please email April Fleming at april.fleming@dhsoha.state.or.us and provide your first and last name. Public and interested parties feedback may be heard during the public interested parties feedback period if indicated on the agenda. Everyone is asked to use appropriate language, manners, and protocols when conducting board business. The meeting is called to order.
Excellent, thank you. So the first item of business is the approval of agenda. We need a motion and a second and a roll call vote to approve the agenda, please.
This is Kelly Crane. I had asked for an addition to the agenda, and I don't know if it was added.
If you're talking about the certification tracks, it's on your agenda. Is that what you're referring to?
It is. I didn't see it on the agenda that I originally got. Is there a second agenda that was sent out?
Yes, along with your materials.
Okay, thank you.
So do we have a motion, a second, and a roll call vote, please?
I'll second. Joe Ferguson.
Who made the motion?
Joe Ferguson. Oh, I don't know who. Was there a motion?
No, there hasn't.
Ferguson, I move to accept the agenda.
I'll second it. This is Davis.
All right, we have a motion and a second. A motion has been made. I'll call roll call. Malcolm McDonald, aye. Joe Ferguson?
Aye.
Kelly Crane?
Aye.
Jeremy Howe?
Aye.
Bill Davis?
Aye.
Kari Hempel?
Aye.
Perfect. Next item on the agenda are introductions. So our new member is Kari Hempel. Kari, would you like to tell the board a little about yourself? And then Malcolm, if you could do a roll call and everybody introduce yourselves.
Sure. Hi, I'm Kari Hempel. I am a sex offense treatment provider with adults, have been in Oregon since 2012, owned my own program since 2014, have been on the OATSA board and served as, I've been on the board since 2012, served as president the last 2 years, just transitioning to Scott Elmore. I think that's the basics of me.
Very good. Thank you, Kari. Joe Ferguson?
I'm Joe Ferguson. I represent the Oregon Juvenile Department Directors Association, so the 36 county juvenile departments. I've been in juvenile justice for about 34 years now. And my term is coming up soon in 23, so July.
Kelly Crane?
Hi, my name is Kelly Crane. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in private practice in Eugene at the Sage House, working with adolescents who have committed sexual offenses. I've been doing this work since 2008 in private practice since 2014. I'm also the current president of the Oregon Adolescent Sex Offense Treatment Network.
Thank you. Jeremy Howell.
Good afternoon or good morning. I'm currently retired, recently retired from clinical practice after about 45 years of rather generic practice, but also included adolescent and adult sex offending treatment. I'm also the treasurer of the Oregon Adolescent Sex Offender Treatment Network.
Thank you. Bill Davis.
Yeah, Bill Davis. Kari and I are well acquainted. I also represent OATSA and private practice psychologist in Salem, working with sex offenders since 1985 and more recently just doing evaluations.
Thank you. I am Malcolm McDonald. I serve as the chair this year for SOTB. I oversee adult parole and probation in Clackamas County, and I represent the Oregon Association of Community Corrections Directors for the 36 counties. Thank you.
Fantastic. Is that everybody?
That's everyone.
Okay, well, in the room, I'm Ann Thompson. I'm the policy analyst that guides this board. We also have in the room April Fleming, and you've gotten emails from her. We have Heather Vogelsong, our contact counsel with the Department of Justice. And we have our tech guru who plugged everything in the right way, Nathan Goldberg. So the three of us, I don't even know how many years we have this at HLO. So if we've got through the introductions, the next thing on the agenda for board action would be to approve the 2023 meeting dates. Now, as I pointed out to Kari during her orientation, if we have a lot of cases or if you enter rulemaking, we might have to add a meeting just for that specific purpose. But these two proposed 2023 meetings are the ones where you have what I call all the furniture, all the reports, all the pieces. It's just a standard meeting. So the office has proposed, of course, this board prefers Friday. You're welcome to change that. But we're looking at 9 a.m. May 12th and 9 a.m. November 17th. We try to keep them as close to what we had this year as possible. If you guys want to check your calendar, if there's a conflict, we can talk about it. If there isn't, we would just need a motion, a second, and a roll call to approve the 2023 meeting dates.
This is Davis. I would move to approve May 12th and 11/17 of 2023 for our meeting dates next year.
Great.
This is
We have a
Howell. Second.
Okay. Roll call, please, Malcolm.
Okay. A motion has been made. I'll call roll. Joe Ferguson.
Aye.
Kelly Crane.
Aye.
Jeremy Howell.
Aye.
Bill Davis.
Aye.
Kari Hempel.
Aye.
And for clarification, Ann, do I just repeat my name and say aye like I did Malcolm McDonald, aye?
Yes, that would be correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Moving right along. So we're going on to the 2023 chair and vice chair. Malcolm McDonald is the chair and Joe Ferguson has served as the vice chair for this board during 2022. I'm looking at the board breakdown and it looks like Dr. Davis is going to complete his term in August of next year, but he can reappoint. Kari is brand new. Joe Ferguson completes his term in July of 2023 and cannot reappoint. Malcolm you are right now serving until replaced, but you're eligible to reappoint if you like. Jeremy, he's good through October of 2024, so he's in good shape. And Kelly, it looks like you're serving until replaced and you can reappoint. So I'm not sure, I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot. Malcolm, if you're planning on reappointing, you could continue to serve as chair. We would need a new vice because Joe will be completing his term before the fall meeting next year. Kari's in play, Dr. Davis. If he's planning on reappointing, he could be in play for leadership, but he's done in August. And Jeremy is certainly available as well. And Kelly, if you're planning on reappointing. So go ahead and have a discussion. Who would like this leadership position and the vice chair?
I'm willing to stay in this position. And
Okay, and you're planning on reappointing? No pressure.
yeah, at this point, that would be the plan, yes. And just please remind me on the reappointment what we need to do.
I can have Derek Foltz reach out to you. Apparently, do we have your correct contact information? Because I think Derek has had a hard time reaching out to you regarding reappointment.
Well, April certainly does. All my emails from her and you.
Okay, great. Well, we'll make sure that we connect you with Derek and he can help you with that. So if you want to serve as chair, if anybody else wants the position or vice, the floor is open.
This is Kelly Crane. I have been trying to reappoint and it's been really difficult. So Malcolm, get some help. It's not an easy process.
I imagine it's even more complicated with the transition happening, so.
Yes, that is actually true. Pretty much the appointment process was very slowly winding down, but now until the new leadership gets in and has their team in place and their office spins back up again, we're really in a pause position. But Derek can help you with whatever pieces we can do now.
Can you give me this is Howell. Can you give me a quick rundown of what the responsibilities of the vice is?
Sure. It's very similar to a case where what the chair does is read scripts, read the roll, enter and exit executive session if there is one, reading scripts essentially. If Malcolm cannot serve or is he not able to attend a meeting, then you would be responsible for reading the scripts and entering and exiting executive session. But we're here to guide you. This is not a throw you to the wolves situation. We'll walk you through if you need help. So Jeremy, if you're up to it, we would just need a motion and a second to either just the chair, or you could do the chair and the vice chair together.
Okay, this is Howell. I'll put my name in for vice.
All right. Now, if anyone in the board is content with Malcolm to continue as service chair and Jeremy as vice, we'd need a motion, a second, and a roll call for those positions.
This is Kelly Crane. I'll move to reappoint Malcolm as the chair and appoint Jeremy Howell as the vice chair.
I'll
This is Joe
second that.
Ferguson.
This is Davis.
Dr. Davis is a second, so we need a roll call, please, Malcolm.
Motion is made. I will call roll. Malcolm McDonald, aye. Joe Ferguson,
Aye.
Kelly Crane,
Aye.
Jeremy Howell,
Aye.
Bill Davis,
Aye.
Kari Hempel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Great job, Malcolm. So we just have a very limited director's report. Our interim director, obviously you guys know from your spring meeting, Sylvie Donaldson has left the office to seek new adventures in Arizona. And former regulatory manager Bob Bothwell is now serving as interim director. Trampus Shuck has stepped in. He was a lead worker. He stepped in as the interim regulatory manager. Besides the office changes, the only thing that's really big heading into session, we might have more soon, is that we have a new program that we're going to be rolling out right after the holidays with a start date of July 1st, where the office is going to start to licensed temporary staffing agencies. And you might have heard of this already. What's so interesting about it, along with any new program that we get that's interesting, is this is the first time we're actually going to be licensing companies, not the individuals who work at the companies, but the companies. And these companies are more often than not even based in Oregon. These are the companies that send workers in to hospitals and care centers, CNAs, RNs, when there is a staffing shortage. And this is very new for us, and it's a little daunting, but like anything else, it's a dare to be great situation. So that program will start licensing July 1st. Part of the statute that created it asked for a report to be brought to them at the end of this year regarding the establishment of potential rate caps, how much these agencies can charge long-term care in hospitals. And based on that report, there might be changes to the legislation. There might be some additional, obligations or requirements. And that's why we're trying to get as much information as we can now and get it ready to go, not knowing what's going to happen when that report goes to the legislature. So any questions on that? Guys are great. So moving on to the fiscal, licensing and fiscal. I am right now looking at the licenses issued clinical therapist slide, if you're following along. Looks like in fiscal year 21, which is, we have those weird years. We talk about it all the time, the state years that go from July 1 to June 30th of the following year. That's why you'll see we actually have fiscal year 23, because we started it in summer of 2022. So it looks like you've had 17 clinical therapist licenses issued since fiscal year 21. 12 in the same time period, 12 associate therapists, 12 secondary clinicals, and that was the new requirement. They were originally called secondary associates, and then they were changed to secondary clinical. The idea being you have somebody who can only see a maximum of 9 clients, hopefully be getting some services out to the rural counties, but not somebody who would ever collect enough hours or have enough clients to reach full clinical status. But the requirements are up there with the clinical therapist. We have 16 sexual offense therapist interns. That's a brand new thing. Going to licenses renewed. Again, if you look at the slide, you see that the majority, but it's kind of split. A lot, in some of our professions, almost everybody renews online. This one is kind of split with the clinical between online and paper. We have a lot more of the associate therapists that renew online. And the secondary clinical can only renew on paper, which is why they only have the orange slides, as is with the intern. They can only renew with paper. Any questions? Okay. Licenses by age and gender. Obviously, there's quite a few requirements for the clinical, and so you expect a slightly older person. But now that we have interns, we have some young people entering the field. We have a few, 26 to 33, and we still have 4 people who are licensed in the 74 to 81 category. Now, we don't know if they're practicing, but they are active. Licensing. Yay! Shout out to Dr. Davis.
All right.
That's great. So certified, we're in licensing trends. These numbers are a little deceptive in that they jump up and down a little bit more, but if you notice, the differences in the numbers are not terribly great. So 75 to 70, it looks like a big dip with the line, but it's really not. It's pretty stable, a couple few less in the clinicals. About the same certified associate therapist. The secondary associate, oh, that should be secondary clinical. Sorry, guys. I will have that fixed. And our interns, we've gone from nothing to 10. That's good. We have a map showing where practitioners are. We used to have like a bar chart, but you guys wanted to see where everybody is. And so we have a map. Still have a few counties with no providers. And quite a few of providers are in Multnomah County. No surprise. And then we get to the page that I know you guys were going to have questions about, the fiscal picture. You guys surfaced in the spring for the first time in a long time. You were in the black. And now, but you had some expenses come in. And now, believe it or not, you are $5 in the red. I double checked that figure because I knew you'd have questions. And essentially you had some expenses that came in that kind of wiped out that little bit of black that you had. But according to the fiscal analyst that verified all these numbers, this is a snapshot in time. And it's kind of like when you have a bunch of bills come in before you get paid. Sometimes, it tips a little. But he said, according to long range forecasts, your guys are going to be back in the black very, very soon. Okay. And at the bottom, we have the shared assessments. Kari, I'll explain to you since you're brand new. All of our boards and programs pay a portion of HLO's expenses to run it's administration fees, right? You have direct costs like salaries, rent, that kind of thing. And then you have these costs that are only assigned to your board if you use the services. Like we do not, at the bottom, we do not administer any of your exams. So you don't pay any examination percentages. The boards that have examinations that we design for them or administer for them would pay a portion based on the services they get and the number of licensees, which means that cosmetology that has tens of thousands of licensees pay the vast majority of the expenses. These little tiny boards, you'll pay a percentage of, we have 3 people that just work on small boards, which is pretty much anyone that isn't cosmetology, processing applications and renewals and that kind of thing. So you'll pay a portion of their salary and their expenses based on the services you use. We don't do any inspections for you. So again, this board doesn't pay any inspection fees. Does that make sense? Awesome. So it kind of like you pay for what you use and the number of licensees you have. The higher numbers will pay a higher percentage. Did you have any questions, Kelly?
No.
No. Okay. Sorry, your screen flashed, so I want to make sure. So we are now on the regulatory report, and Trampus, who is heroically joining us while ill at home, is going to walk us through the regulatory report.
Hello,
Trampus.
everyone. This is Trampus. Shuck, I'm the interim regulatory manager, as Ann pointed out a little while ago. Took over for Bob in the interim. So we have the regulatory report. It's actually, we have 2 biennium on there right now. And we have the 2021, the 2023. And the 2021 of the 17 complaints we got in, we have 2 still open. And then in the 2023 biennium, which is kind of the current biennium we're in, we've had 5 come in. Probably a lower number because we're not all the way through it. But we have 3 that still are showing open, but those 3 are actually the ones that we're going to be looking at in executive session. So those 3 could actually be closed. So you guys are actually in pretty decent shape case-wise. So does anybody have any questions? Looks like Joe.
Yeah, on the open cases, so I know we have the 3 today. So I had made a complaint, but I haven't heard anything on that complaint, or it's not one of those 3. So
okay. Yeah, I would have to look and see which one that one was.
okay, I made it back in August.
Yeah, I would have to look into that, and I would have to, if you're the complainants, I could.
Joe and Trampus, that might be something you want to talk about outside of the meeting, and Trampus can follow up with Joe.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to have to do. If you were the complainant, I can touch base with you about that complaint as the complainant.
All right.
This is Kelly Crane. I have a question. I also know of a complaint that was made in April, June, and it's not any of them that are being discussed. And so my question is more of, if there is a complaint made and then it's closed out, do we even hear about it on this board?
So yeah, a lot of the complaints come and are closed out through the board. So most of them are reviewed by the board when we close them. So you made a complaint?
I was not the one who made the complaint, but I was informed of the complaint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would have to, I would have to know which specific one that was. But
And
I
I
don't have any
and I know
details
that
on it.
Okay, and I know that the person who the complaint was made against was interviewed.
Was not interviewed?
Was
So-
interviewed.
Yeah.
Hang on, I think
Yeah,
our
we-
attorney has something to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, please.
So normally the specifics of the investigations we don't talk about in public session since that is confidential investigatory information. So if there is a specific question on a case, you can talk about that with Trampus directly, or if it is an investigation, we can talk about that during the executive session on investigations and cases. That way we don't get into any details or the complainants and disclose information that should be kept confidential. Thanks.
Right.
Okay. Anything else, Trampus?
That's all I have.
Okay. Any questions? Anything we can talk about? Okay. Well, that brings us to the policy section, and I'm going to hand it over to Kelly, who wanted this item added to the agenda. For this is for the board to discuss certification tracks for people who work with juveniles, adults, or both. Go right ahead,
Yes.
Kelly.
Thank you. This is Kelly Crane. And so there was also the question, we've been trying, as some of you have been on the board know, we've been trying to get a work committee together in regards to looking at being specific about some of the training components for those who are working with adolescents, those who are working with adults, and what we would want to see that crosses over. We had tried to start this right before the pandemic, and there was a request for OSOTN to put together a committee and OATSA to put together a committee and then have those committees talk. And that, as I understand, has never really gone forward. So at our last SOTB board meeting, we talked about starting up a work group sponsored by HLO. And at that point, my recollection is that HLOs, you guys are going through a lot of changes, and you said that you didn't have it on your bandwidth to put that together at that time. So the first part of my question is it on the bandwidth where we could put that together again? I do understand from the subcommittee at OSOTN that they are wanting to do that. I understand from Scott Elmore, speaking for OATSA, that they want to do that. So I think there's some good interest if we wanted to do that in a formal way. So that's part one. And then part two is the discussion amongst the board around having tracks so that when someone is certified to be an offense-specific treatment provider, that they have specific training that qualifies them to work with juveniles versus adults, and or have a dual track. So someone could be certified to work with adolescents, certified to work with adults, or certified to work with both. And part of that concern comes from those in the adolescent field, because there is a lot of research on how different treatment of adolescents is from the treatment of adults, and particularly wanting to look at brain development and the development of the adolescent and all those kinds of things. And so the question is, as a board, if this is something we want to push forward, having that discussion if we do, number one. And number two, if we do, is that something that can occur through rules that the SOTB board can make, or does it have to be something that goes through the legislature? So that would be the other part of it. So I guess maybe start with a discussion about the two tracks.
Kari?
Kelly, I very much understand and I totally agree with that being an excellent goal. And you're absolutely right. OATSA has discussed this, and obviously between OSOTN and OATSA over the last several years. What is coming to mind though right now is it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue just getting providers period in the field, with many providers leaving and they're being very either retiring or literally shifting into different into different fields and very, very few new providers. So that's, I know in OATSA, I was just in an offender management committee through the sexual assault task force. And so I think there's a lot of bodies, OACCD, parole board, OATSA, hopefully a SOTB as well, who are going to start doing work or have work groups or are going to be forming work groups to work on just simply how do we keep and get more providers. And my concern right now, one, is having multiple work groups on things that it always takes forever to get through any of these things and make any real progress. That if we make it harder to get in the field, that you have to specialize, that right now might not be the right time to do that. Is a concern, or at least something that I feel like we need to be thinking about really carefully right now.
This is Crane. So I totally agree. That has also been discussed about a concern of folks leaving the field, and we're actually also working on how to recruit folks in. We're working with the Oregon Youth Authority and different counties and looking on how to do that. And it highlights even more from the adolescent treatment providers the need for these two tracks, because we have a big concern on those who've been working with adults moving in and because of the lack of providers, and moving in and starting to work with adolescents and doing that from the adult perspective without the training that's specific to juveniles. So I hear what you're saying, and actually I think from our perspective, it's even more of a need for that. And like you said, these things take a long time, and so getting that ball rolling at this point, seeing what we have to do, it could be a while before it even happened, and I don't want to wait and then have it be that much longer. Or that would be my thoughts on that.
I would, yeah, with what Kari said, I mean, those are my concerns, is how we not restrict or make it more difficult to get individuals certified. And maybe there's a parallel track, Kelly, where we can work on these two things together and it makes sense. But yes, we're seeing the number, I mean, typically the metro area has had a number of certified SOTB, and there has never been a strain on the kind of metro area system like there has been in the rural areas of the state, which we've discussed before, how we build capacity there. But currently our capacity is being reduced, and that's troublesome across the board, whether we're talking about juvenile or adult, and how we prioritize who's going to actually, it's more like who isn't going to get treatment, because we know who the priority often needs to go to. One question I have, and that has come up in licensing in the, we do have a lot of telehealth that happens, and I know even in SOTB it's happening. It can be very effective for certain populations. What is the current rules regards to individuals that may have the qualifications or licensure if the state happens to have similar to SOTB to be licensed in the state but practice virtually, so not actually reside here? Is that something that is licensable? Does that open any doors? So it's a question I have. It's come up. Kari has her hand up. Maybe I don't know if it's a response to my question or if anyone.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
At least for licensed LPCs that I am, the provider can reside in any state. The client has to not only reside, but literally physically be in the state when we're providing services. But I'm not sure how that is for various licenses.
Looking at ways to maybe add, but also address responsivity issues with individuals that come on that require treatment, and it's very difficult in certain areas when we have language barriers to find someone to provide treatment that may be available somewhere else. And I don't know for sure. It'd be really reaching out to ATS on a national level, but it's just how we can kind of add that capacity for particularly that lower risk population is probably not as I don't know how effective on the juvenile world that would be, and whether how much telehealth is being utilized in that arena. Kelly?
Yeah, so I think that this is an excellent discussion, but it's a little different from the one that we started with, in that we're now talking about how to bring people into the field, which I think is very valuable. And I know that there's at least one juvenile provider who is living out of state and doing telehealth and working with youth, especially in the rural areas, the counties that don't have a provider. So I know it can be done. I also know that this board did an excellent job in starting to track the intern track, which does help us bring in some providers before they're actually licensed. The problem in the juvenile world is that, at least for those of us who work in private practice, the Oregon Youth Authority and some of the counties that get their money from the Oregon Youth Authority are not allowing us to bill through the intern track. And so that's an issue that we're currently working on. But I think this board, I think, has done a good job in adding that track. And I don't know if this board could get involved in working on some of these solutions to bringing new people into the field. That would be awesome if that was something this board was able to do, either in, again, doing up a work group and trying to get some momentum going within the working with the graduate schools, working, whatever that might look like. It's a whole big discussion.
Yeah, this is Ann. It would be inappropriate for this board to promote the profession. That would be the task of an association. You're here for public protection, not to increase or divert, when we didn't, this board did not add the intern track. That was done by legislative concept and a bill that went through. So our job is just to enforce the laws as they exist. If you want to promote the profession or add a certification, that would be legislation, and that would be an individual in their capacity as an individual, not a board member or an association.
So, and on Kelly's question as far as the track piece, just for clarification, is that can require legislation?
It's something, if the board, the majority of the board would like to pursue this, what we would have to do is turn to our partners at the DOJ and have them look at your statutes and what mechanisms might be available there. We've had legal advice questions about, some different concepts that the board thought would be important that your statutes didn't support. So that would be something, if you really want to pursue it, we could ask Heather Vogelsong to put it on her long list of things to do, to look if you have the authority to have different tracks, it's almost like a specialty license. We have some providers who are interested in like a specialty certification, and we would have to see if you have that within your statutes to do.
So that answers one question. And secondly, just in regards to providing treatment, telehealth in this particular SOTB licensure, is there anything that speaks to that specifically? Is there anything that we need? Because I know a lot of things have changed, but that would need to be discussed about. Are there changes or anything that we would need to look at to make that clarified?
For telehealth?
Yes.
I'm looking in your rules right now. I know, grab my giant book of many things. There was some conversation about treatment occurring, with the provider, and it has to be live and in real time and all that. But let me look and see. The word telehealth does not appear anywhere. I can tell you that. But as far as, go ahead.
Does it appear in any of your other, I don't know if,
no,
I forget. So are we the only ones that where telehealth would be applicable to current licensing that you do?
No, we have licensed dietitians who serve patients all over the place. Behavior analysis, where therapists work with children with autism diagnosis. There is some discussion of telehealth, as long as because behavior analysis is very different in that you have the main analyst who looks at the child and talks with them and decides on like a treatment plan, but then the treatment plan is put into place by an interventionist, almost like a technician. who does the work, records the responses, and then that data is analyzed and they might change the treatment plan. And I know they've relied a little bit on telehealth, especially during the pandemic, to make sure, because with autistic children, you have a very small window of time where they can kind of really make a difference with the therapy, and you don't want to interrupt that, right? So, but the word telehealth doesn't appear anywhere, but I know we have several professions that do engage in that.
With the topic we're talking about, Kelly's concern and what I have brought up, would that be something we could schedule a board meeting to further discuss, and that would be the sole purpose of that meeting?
Okay, and just so that I'm very clear, you're wondering if Oregon licensed SOTB folks could provide telehealth?
Well, that's a piece of it. And also, can someone be licensed, someone that has the qualifications to be licensed, but has a business in another state, become licensed in Oregon and provide the service to residents of Oregon?
And via telehealth?
Correct.
Okay, so licensed outside the state and provide services in the state via telehealth.
I'm saying that they would, my understanding is they would need to become licensed in the state of Oregon. So they may be a provider in another state and have the qualifications, and they would need to submit licensure.
Yeah. Well, I can verify that with our attorney, but what's so interesting is that every single state that I've spoken to with this profession has a radically different qualifications. And so it's very hard to have somebody who has the same qualification state to state. But I will have to ask Heather if, how we would approach that, because I honestly don't know. So I could look into it.
Yeah, no, that would be helpful, just in regards to kind of my thought process is that if I'm a provider in another state and I look at licensing requirements and I meet the requirements of those, I submit that information and I can become licensed. Based on Oregon law and the rules, can I provide telehealth to Oregon residents?
Okay, I can certainly find that out for you, Kelly, and Kari also. Go ahead, ladies.
I just wanted to two things. So on the telehealth, in the program I work on, we do have a therapist who has talked to the SOTB about this year or more ago, and she is certified. She maintained her Oregon certification and has moved out of state. So I'm pretty sure that I guess FYI, obviously it would still be good to have that reconfirmed, but so I don't know that it's going to be the most amazing solution for getting more people. I think it's still something useful to pursue, just because ASA just happened. I didn't go, but lots of people on the OASA board said that this is a very national problem, not just statewide. But I mean, it still doesn't hurt to have it on the table if it's possible is another way. Plus, again, any people out of state working in Oregon, if the SOTB will certify them, whatever their licensing body is, they also have to get licensed as a mental health professional in Oregon. So I mean, working in multiple states as a mental health professional it's expensive and time consuming, because you have to meet requirements for both. People do it, but it's challenging.
Thank you, Kari. Kelly?
I don't know why my hand is raised.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate the clarification. Bill, was that you that I heard your voice?
Yeah, I just was going to harken back to Kelly's first subject, I guess, issue, and that's in my mind, the reason for putting the curriculum together initially was to make it crystal clear what we felt minimum educational requirements needed to be in order to do the work. And I think that the second issue in my mind is, once we decide what the minimums are, whether it's adult or adolescent, then do we want to certify people once we have the ability to identify what it is that we think we might want from people, to somehow designate that they have that particular specialty? And I think all of that could go on outside of this other recruitment issue or shortage issue. This minimum, what are we really requiring as a minimum training is a question that's been around as long as I've been around, and it really needs to be answered, and then fine-tuned, in that order. I think just a thought.
It goes back to Kelly's question to Ann: is there capacity to do this, and if so, or if not, when?
Well, we keep getting new programs, new boards, new requirements, new expectations, and we're not getting any new staff. So I know there has been some talk, and again, this is so far above my pay grade, some talk about adding some staff, which would obviously expand bandwidth. But right now, nothing has really changed. I mean, if anything, now we're down a director and we have an interim director, and we're going into legislation. We already have another board, or no, it's a program that we have to get spinning, and we have, work with our other boards that we have to do. So as of right now, nothing has changed. How far out OHA budgets and decides that, splitting 17 boards and programs between 2 people, maybe we need somebody else. I've not been privy to those conversations. So I'm more than happy we can revisit this in the spring and see. It seems like every legislative session I've worked here, I'll be here almost 9 years, we get at least one new board or program. There's already new concepts that are coming forward, and some new boards that they proposed to us in the last couple of sessions that didn't go through, but we expect them to come back around again. So our bandwidth is the same or less than it was. We can revisit again in the spring and see if anything changes.
This is Davis again. I would wonder if, with some careful guidelines by the staff, could the board organize such a work group? I know there's got to be some separation in terms of how many board members could be on such a group, or whether they should be on the group at all. And some of those kinds of discussions need to be had, and we need education about that because the legalities of it all. But I'm wondering if you would have the bandwidth to give the board direction in that regard, and then let us contact some people to go ahead and put together this work group so that we can just get moving. Because unless we're very specific about it, I don't think it's going to happen very readily. There's
Right.
just too many reasons not to pay attention.
Oh, no, I understand. And when we did the juvenile practice standards, that was a solid year of work that we put in. So, I mean, when we have the time, we don't mind doing it. The important thing is you don't want to have an inadvertent board meeting. You don't want to have a quorum of board members sitting there working because you triggered an inadvertent board meeting. And for this board, I believe it's 4. And if you are working in your capacity as an OSOTN member, and perhaps if I'm speaking out of turn, Heather can help me, but if you're working as your capacity as a practitioner, as an OSOTN or an OATSA member, that's fine. You can't be there representing the board. You can't speak on behalf of the board. But if you are there as part of an association working on something, as long as you don't have a quorum, I don't see a problem. Heather, am I between the goalposts here?
That sounds like what you're thinking about, just as background, is that this is not something HLO directed. And so if board members are getting together outside of HLO, then yes, you would want to be there and say that you're not speaking on behalf of the board, so that you're not representing the board, and you want to be very aware of the quorum requirements so that you're, like Ann said, not having an inadvertent board meeting. And other than that, I think those are the things to be most concerned about that Ann hit on.
So strategy wise, go ahead, Kelly. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say I appreciate what you were saying about getting some guidance so that we could really push getting a committee working together. And so it sounds to me like it would be possible to reach out to some folks, like some folks here, to talk about who in our perspective or respective professions, i.e. those working with adolescents, those working with adults, who would be willing to commit to the time and the work and the effort it would take to sit together and put together some guidelines for what we would want to see as the bare minimum of training for each of those professions, and then I guess bring that back to the full board. Is that what you're proposing?
Yeah, so I think it can't be board directed at this point, is what I'm hearing, but we could certainly independently through our associations establish that work group. And I just think we just need to get it done. I mean, we're kind of bumping on it, but not really forming a group. And I think if we can put maybe 6 people together and add others as need be, and move forward on this, that's what really needs to happen. You know, we need to form it, name it, you know, put the goal in front of us, produce a product that we can then bring back to the board and say, we'd recommend that this be the minimum requirements. And I think we could probably move forward with something like that through the board. It's unless unless the DOJ has something to say about that. What's the rules?
Right. I think it would be helpful before that that group meets is to have that run through HLO so that they can take a look at it, make sure that there's nothing else after it's put together. You know, they can take a look at who from the board is going to be on it, if anyone, how that information is going to be relayed, whether it does or does not pertain to board business, and can give you further direction as to whether there's anything else. So if a concept is developed, I would recommend you sending that to Ann so that can be further weighed in on in case any further direction is needed.
This is Howell. There was some earlier discussion about checking out whether we can even do the 2 tracks. So I think that needs to be also examined.
So this is Craig. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that sounds like one of those things that the lawyers are going to have to decide if it's mandated for us or not. It seems to me that it's no different than some of the other decisions that have been made about certification titles and responsibilities and requirements. I mean, it just sounds like another layer of that. But I may be wrong. There may be some technicalities that I'm not aware of.
This is Crane. I appreciate, I think, Ann, you said that it would be something we would need to put on Heather's very long list of looking to see whether that is something that could happen through rules or if it would have to be legislative. And so I would totally support us putting that on her long list so that at least once we have that information, we can make a decision, and it doesn't preclude us from going ahead with a committee to look at what the bare minimum of training needs to be, because those can be very separate things still.
And I'll just clarify in regards to my comments. My concern comes from whether the meetings that you're envisioning and this group is a board directed type of group, or whether it really is separate from the board and being more directed from the associations. And so that's why I'm suggesting to make sure there's a second look at that. Because if it's board directed, I think there's other implications, and we want to make sure that we're addressing that versus whether it's the associations getting together and just one board member being a part of that is a different type of situation, you being there as in your individual capacity and not as a board member. So.
And I'm not sure about Osoden, but I know OATSA has had parallel discussions to this since around the time that the board was formed. So, you know, to say that it originated with the board would not be entirely accurate. But it's something that I think definitely coalesces with what the board's trying to do.
Yeah, this is Kelly. So Crane. So I think for myself, I've had some frustration because this is something that we've been talking about for a number of years, and we did at one point look at the associations. I know my association, OATSA, or excuse me, OSOTN, we've talked about it, looked at it, and it sounds like OATSA has too, but so for some reason we're not getting together and having those meetings, and maybe having it board directed, if we can do that, you know, run it through and make sure we're doing it appropriately, would give it the oomph needed to have it really pursued.
I think we can take whatever's possible. No problem.
Okay, so I'm just so that I can kind of stay clarified, we have a couple of, at least two questions out there. If board members in their capacity as association members get together to form this work group, you would want to give us the list in advance of the people that are participating in their role, like what perspective they're representing, so that we can make sure that there aren't any implications with inadvertent board meetings. Do I have that correct? Okay. And then you also want to know if the statutes allow you to have 2 tracks to certification based on specialty, whether you work with juveniles, adults, or both. Okay. And then there was this other kind of amorphous question I'm trying to get my mind around. Is this work group board directed, or is it generated by an association? Or, Heather, did I catch that correctly?
So I think the idea that I'm hearing is that the board would like to task a group, and they would like to have associations on it, but they would like to have recommendations from this group to come to the board for the curriculum and what the avenues would be for training to have a juvenile track and to have an adult track, or to have a combined track. So from what I'm hearing, it sounds like the board would most like to have it a board tasked group with association involvement. But if that is not possible, then that would be something that is separate. And then what are the requirements for having board members be able to be a part of that, if at all? In their individual capacities, wouldn't be as a board member. I get that right, Kelly?
That's what I yes, from my perspective, yes.
Yeah, same here.
Thank you.
Okay, so Heather, what would be the next step on having a board tasked group for them to collect the people that are interested and their view, the position they're representing, and then send it to me, and we'll vet it through and make sure there are no potential conflicts? Is that correct?
So yeah, I think that they would want to provide you with guidance as to who they would want to have on that group, which associations, which members should be on that group, to get the collective professional viewpoints that they think are important to have. Whether they think any board members need to be on that group, or whether they would just report their recommendations to the board. What the scope of the group would look at, if they have we have that general topic, or whether there's something more specific that they also want. And I think then they would turn that over to HLO for HLO to start looking at, and looking at to see if there's any problems with that, and then also to start forming that group so that then it can provide those recommendations to the board. That's kind of what I'm envisioning, is what that looks like.
Okay, and then at what part of the work does the dual track conversation come in? Do we wait for the group to decide that's what they want, and then we will check our statutes? Is that the order of go?
So I think that could be flexible in terms of if they're getting these recommendations from the group as to this dual track, then if the board wants that information first, to be able to decide whether to go forward with that, and then to decide whether that needs to go through a legislative change or through a rule change, or they could say run it at a parallel, and that the way they get all of the same information and they can collect that and make decisions based on that. So they could do that, or they could do it the other way around, is get the advice in regards to whether it's a legislative change or a rule change, and then decide whether to go forward with a work group. So I think that's in terms of resources and priorities, that for the board to decide which way to go, and HLO as well as resources to come to that decision.
Okay, so board members, do you have any thoughts on how you want to see these pieces play out?
This is Crane, Kelly. I have another question in regards to if this board is going to be submitting names to HLO. We can't really meet together outside of this meeting to identify those names, as my understanding, because then we would be in a de facto board meeting. So is it true then that maybe right now we need to designate either individuals or associations, and maybe one person that would be putting all that together to submit to HLO? I want to know kind of what are the practicalities of that, number one. And then the second one, personally, I would really like to see a parallel with finding out that information in regards to the dual tracks, because it's not like we can't do it. It's just whether or not we would have to do it legislatively or we could do it with rules. And that, of course, whichever that could be brings up a whole nother, I mean, if we have to do a legislative thing, that's a whole nother discussion. But it would be good to know that at sooner than later, I would think.
Okay, so as long as you don't have an inadvertent board meeting, which for your board, you have 7 members, as long as you don't have 4 people from the board in this group working, you should be fine. And again, as Heather pointed out, make sure everybody knows you're there as your capacity as a practitioner or a member of OSOTN, not as a board member. So that should be fine. And we can put looking into the legislation for the option to create separate tracks. We could put that on Heather's very long list. Did I capture that accurately?
I think that if there are recommendations for getting that group together, you could also do it right here and just say who you think would be in that group. That way the board can all come in. And then if there's individuals specifically that people would like to recommend, they can send that to Anne after the board meeting, and could prevent having to necessarily meet outside of the meeting. so if that makes sense, if board members are ready to say who they think would be best to participate in such a work group, and then later can provide names to Anne individually as people that they have gone back to their associations to say this person would be willing, or you may want to check with this person. But that way you can, as a board, look at who would be on that work group. If it's a board directed work group, that's where it's a little fuzzy to me as to how this is going to function. So if it's a board directed work group, I would recommend that the board talk a little bit about who they would like to and what positions they would like to have on that work group in terms of what associations, what membership.
This is Crane. So last time we kind of had a discussion about this. It was having a certain number of representatives from OSOTN, a certain number of representatives from OATSA, and there was a question about having a victim advocate be on that group. Would we want to start there? Do we want to see like the, I mean, it is a treatment training focus, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have the input from the corrections side as well, if they want to have that input. So I guess that's my question.
Yes, Joe Ferguson. So Kelly, I appreciate that. So I would actually go back to our association and get somebody other than myself. Just because I'm a board member and I'm coming off in July. So, you know, I don't want to start something that I'm not going to be able to finish. So on that. So it would be someone from our associations that's not associated with the board.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Davis. I'm kind of feeling like going back to the associations and getting the solid commitments, not just is this a good idea, but a solid commitment from maybe at least 3 people to make a core group from each board. And because in my mind, I can see bringing in different people at different times because of their particular specialties or specific tasks that needed to be done. But we need a driving group, you know, we need a group of people who will stay with it. And so to report the names today would be pretty impossible, I think.
Can I, for just clarification, and I guess my one concern being that if this were to require a legislative requirement, that would have to be done by the organizations outside of this board, correct?
Correct. That is correct. We're the executive branch, and we do what the legislature mandates us to do. It is not one of our functions to go back to legislation. It would have to be done by an individual in their own capacity or as an association.
Okay.
Which is how we changed from being a practice group to a title group to, I forget which way it went, but that was not done by the board. That was done by a group kind of spearheaded by the sexual assault group with some people that are in our fields on it. So yeah, that would, if it goes legislative, there would be a different group that would spearhead that.
So that would be where my direction or request would be, that we answer that question before this board puts a bunch of work into it. I think certainly what I've heard is the associations can come together and solidify that who's going to participate. And when we have that answer, we can move forward with this potential kind of work group and move forward. But if it has to be legislative, then we're out of the mix, and it wouldn't come back to us until legislation is actually done. So
Malcolm, I'm curious about that, because I can see that this board getting that going with looking at the criteria for training doesn't necessarily mean that means we're going to split into 2 different tracks. We still want to have a little bit more specifics on what those training hours should be, because right now there's very little guidance. So many hours of assessment, so many hours of this, nothing about some of the newer things that are in our field. And I think whether we split off into tracks or not, still having these groups look at what are some of the essential trainings is important.
Sounds like that certainly still could be done, but I think we have to be very clear on which we're doing and moving forward. So we need the legislative question answered, and then the training side, like we've done, we can continue to have that discussion or refinement if it falls under our authority.
So it sounds like getting that answer to whether this is a legislative or rule in terms of doing tracks, not a different question in terms of what other, how this might impact education and other requirements, continuing legal education or that type of thing. Getting that question answered. And then it sounds like at the same time, individuals will go back in touch with their associations to clarify the interest in being a part of such a group if we're one to form. And then that way there could be direction once it's known whether it needs to be by legislation or by rule as to who would participate in that group. And then next would be how that group comes about, whether it's under a board direction or separate from the board.
This is Crane. That sounds great. Thank you. And I don't know that those groups who want to work on looking at that criteria for education and training couldn't still go ahead and start meeting. And just as a matter of trying to get this moving forward, if we have one person on this board who would be willing to be the person that, for example, Joe could contact and say, here is so-and-so who would like to be the representative for the juvenile corrections. And someone could say, here's who the OSOTN representative would be. Maybe we could do that. And then we just have one person that's being contacted so we don't run into the concerns of an inadvertent board meeting. And then that person could submit those names to HLO. Does that work?
So I think that I'm trying to so sorry, thinking through a few things here. So as board members, you'll be going back to your associations and talking to them and getting information about who would be willing to participate in something. And then I think if you individually report to Anne that information, and then that way you're supplying information to her for possible work would be a good idea. And then if you the issue of meeting, I'm just trying to think through that. If there is, you're going to start meeting separate from that, it sounds like that is not board business, needs to not be reported to Anne and not figured out through this meeting, but it would be going through your associations, and then you would be working with your associations to have the associations work that out as to meeting and getting that settled. And so that's where this gray area is as to whether this starts becoming board directed and working outside of the public meeting. So I don't know if that clarifies it, but if you individually are going to report information to Anne so that Anne has that information. So if it does become a board directed work group, then Anne has that and ready to go when you're ready to pull the trigger. That's one thing. But if you're planning to meet before that, then I think that needs to be done separate from Anne, separate from this public meeting, and you'll talk with your associations and figure out who from your association will be connecting with, it sounds like, the other associations, and Kelly might be from your association, you might be the person working on that, but it would be those other associations contacting you and getting that information so that it's not board related. Trying to keep that line clear. Does that make sense?
I'm a little, my head's spinning a little. So if each of the associations talk and decide who they're going to have be working on this, that information could be shared between those associations, and they could start meeting. And at any time then that they decide that they want to be board directed, then their names, et cetera, it would be submitted to Anne for making sure that there's not a problem. Is that right?
Yeah, so it would be
Okay.
separate from HLO, separate from Anne happening. It's just these associations are doing it, and individuals and board members are doing it, not in their board capacity, but as
Right.
an association member. That would be separate from anything that is given to Anne for something that would be later board directed. Yeah.
So it's not too different than what we talked about doing a couple of years ago and didn't quite follow through with. So, but this time though, and I just mean us as the associations, nothing with HLO or this board. And so if we can do that, then those people who do end up working together can have that discussion about wanting to wait for board to be a board directed or to go ahead and move forward. Is that fair?
Yeah, so at that later time, once the board knows whether it can do this by rule, then they could then say, oh, okay, now we want to reach out to the associations. The associations would be ready with members to put on it, and that could happen at that point. So, but separate from whatever the associations are doing in the meantime, and gathering their own information. And then as individual board members, you'll just want to be aware that as those associations are meeting, be aware of that if issues are coming up where it's looking like board and business and you have a quorum, then it should be going off in your heads, this might be a public meeting, and because we don't know yet whether it's legislation or rule, that type of thing, and maybe I need to take account of that so that this isn't a public meeting that's being held inadvertently. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does that clarify things, Anne, as well?
I think so. I think we have a lot of those if then kind of things that will unfold in the coming months. And I'm sure that this work group can maybe dial down on training, even if it doesn't end up splitting into two tracks. I mean, so this group, they decide if they want to do it on their own, if they want it to be board directed. And then once they kind of get in there and mix it up, what do they have? And if it splits into two tracks. So I think that's how I understand how things are going to go. Am I correct?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So I think we have some steps to sort out there. Is there anything else in the policy discussion, or do we want to go to public interested parties feedback? You want to move on?
Yeah, let's move on.
Okay. I forgot to mention at the start of the meeting that Malcolm is on a clock. So we're keeping an eye out for him. If you do have to drop out, Malcolm, we still have quorum, so we're okay. So
Okay,
hang
yeah.
on, let me check the public phone lines. 1 second. Hi, this is Ann at HLO. Is there anyone on the public phone line? Hearing no one. I guess we don't need to do that, Malcolm.
Right.
So that brings us to item 7 on the agenda, which is legal advice. You have your script, Malcolm?
I do. So we're entering
Okay.
into executive session.
Yes, and then after you read your scripts, give us a moment because we have to switch the recordings over, okay?
All right.
Go right ahead.
The Sexual Offense Treatment Board will now meet in executive session pursuant to ORS 192.660, 2F, ORS 192.355, 9A, and ORS 40.225 for the purpose of considering information exempt from public disclosure at 10:28 a.m. on November 18th, 2022. Representatives of the news media shall be allowed to attend the executive session by conference call and will be provided further call-in instructions shortly. The public phone line will be muted for the duration of the executive session. Are there any representatives of the news media on the public phone line?
There is not.
Okay. Recognizing there is no news media in attendance, the public phone line will be muted for the duration of the executive session. We will return to open session before taking any final action or making any final decisions. We are now in executive session.
The phone is muted.